We are in the theme of pilgrimage, as Philip says. This whole year so far, we've been talking about what it means to be on pilgrimage. Adam Peacock kicked us off in the year. It's been really cool so far. I mean, it works on so many different levels, literally walking, metaphorically following Jesus. And then we've finished the first sub-theme, which is worship. And we've just started the second sub-theme, which is formation, and what it means to be formed into a pilgrim of Jesus or a follower of Jesus. And last week, if you weren't here, my dad introduced a new word or topic called Christoformity. And he defined Christoformity as being formed into the image of Christ, or maybe another way to put it, being formed into or becoming the person that God designed you to be. This year, Bible Project, it's a resource a lot of people use in our church. They're doing a whole year on the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't know if you've read the Sermon on the Mount recently, Matthew 5-7. It's Jesus' teachings on how to be a disciple of him and what his way is like. I know Ginny's been keeping up with it. And I was going through the Sermon on the Mount with a class that I teach here for these high schoolers. And one of the kids there, who I really like, he was really cool. He always asked the best questions. And we were reading through the Sermon on the Mount, and things like, do not be angry when someone hits you, but pray for them and love them. Do not objectify women. Do not stay faithful to your relationship. Don't be a hypocrite. If you say something, do it. Don't try to manipulate people. It's just like these, it just goes on and on and on, hits all these spheres of life. And then when I was done, I was like, how does that, imagine if everybody really acted that way, what kind of world we would be living in. And this kid was like, I've always called myself a Christian, and I consider myself a disciple of Jesus, but when you read that, I don't live that way at all, ever. So should I really call myself a Christian? And I think that was like a really honest question. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't always live that way either. But I think it's just a good thought to sometimes read over that and realize, what if I did live that way? And what would it take to live that way and become the kind of person that when someone hits you, which probably doesn't happen that often, maybe, hopefully, your response is to love. Or when someone cuts you off in traffic, your response is to love them and pray for them. Or you are never tempted to objectify or manipulate somebody else. What would it take for that to be your automatic trained response, that you don't even have to think about it, that's just the way that you act? And nobody gets that way by accident or automatically. It takes transformation of the spirit within, but it also, I think, importantly, takes a little bit of effort and practice outside as well. And my dad also introduced something last week called a rule of life. And I think this is important. You can go to the next slide. A rule of life. And when I say rule, don't think law, rule, like you have to follow, things you have to follow in life. Rule just comes from the Latin word regula. Autocorrected to regular, but it's regula. And regula just means patterns or rhythms. So it's the patterns or rhythms of life. And a lot of people have changed, today, just to get away from the word rule and all that it brings up for people, call it a rhythm of life. Rhythms of life are patterns that we fall into day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, that shape who we are becoming. And we all have yearly rhythms that shape us. We've talked about before the church calendar, trying to be yearly rhythms that shape us to live into Christ's life so we can become more like Christ. We have weekly rhythms, like if you're here today, this is a pretty weekly rhythm, to come to church on Sunday, take communion together, have fellowship together, learn something together, sing together. That's going to shape you. And then we have daily routines, brushing our teeth, hopefully, or going to work, or eating breakfast, or eating dinner with your family, things like that will shape you. But we often don't think about the fact that we are also being counterformed all the time. We don't live in a box or isolated, and I think that's a good thing. But when we're out in the world, we interact with certain kinds of people. We interact with certain kinds of media. We interact with our job, with the grocery store, whatever it takes. And all of those things are forming us into certain kinds of people as well. And those rhythms really change who we become, whether we know it or not. For example, we live in a very consumerist capitalist society, right? One of the most in the world that's ever existed. So most of our holidays, every time a holiday comes up on the calendar, one of the first things we all think is, oh man, I got to start saving money for that because of the things that I will have to buy. That has not been the way it's been in every country throughout history. But we have been shaped by media, by advertising, by what the world or the US has said what the good life is, that we are first and foremost consumers ready to buy things. And so that shapes our identity. That's just one example. News outlets, another example, shaping our identity, forming you into a specific political identity, which might be good or might be bad. I remember I was listening to a podcast, and I still really like the podcast. I appreciate it for a while. And I was listening to it every week because they had a new episode every week, and I listened to a lot of podcasts. And in it, they were always complaining about a very specific kind of political identity, which I don't need to name. And they were always just like, oh man, these people are doing that again, and these people are doing that again. And at first I was like, oh man, they're so harsh, kind of give them a break, you know? But after listening to it for like 2 months or 3 months, I noticed that once I ran into someone with that political identity, my first thought was, ugh, those people, they're always doing stuff, you know? And I wasn't like that before, but just regularly listening to that formed me in a way I was unaware of. And I think it's important to realize, because that means, as John Mark Comer says, if we want to be formed into the image of Christ, we're not starting at a blank slate. We're not like Plato, neutral, and now all of a sudden we're hopefully being formed more and more like Jesus. First, we need counter-formation. We need to be undoing the formation that we do every day so that we can be reformed. And that takes a lot of intention. It takes intentionally forming daily rhythms. Sometimes you might get really excited about them. Sometimes they might feel boring. But it takes writing them down, planning them ahead of time. Because 2 hours on a Sunday where we gather are not nearly enough to shape you from all the other counter-formation that's happening throughout the week. It might be a good start if that's not part of your rhythm already. But I think there's so much more to life that life has to offer. I am currently in seminary, and one of my very first classes I ever had to take was a Rhythm of Life class. And I was really unsure why, but one of my professors in that class was trying to explain that when people join seminary, they just have all these questions, they want to know all the answers, they want to become smart, they just want to have all this knowledge, dive into it. And he's like, but why? What's it for? Is it just so you can feel smart? Because then it's kind of a waste of time. And he said, there's no use in diving in and learning if you're not using it for love, if you're not becoming a kind of person that will use it the right way. So they require every single student to take a Rhythm of Life class where you try different spiritual practices and you create for yourself a rhythm of life, a daily one, a weekly one, a monthly one, and a yearly one, to stay grounded. So that's just an intro to spiritual formation and rhythms of life. We're going to go through a lot of different ideas related to creating rhythm of life and spiritual formation. And I want to clarify too, this isn't just about willpower. This isn't like a motivational, you will be successful if you just master your mind over body and follow these steps and become this kind of person. It's not that at all, actually. I think some of that stuff can be very damaging. Sometimes helpful, sometimes not. But this is about allowing the Spirit to transform who you are and creating habits that make it easier for you to cooperate in that process. We live in Wine County. You probably, whether you've been in a vineyard or not, you've seen all the grapes grow, and they're usually on a vine, and the vine is usually on like a, what's it called, like a trellis, like a frame that they grow up. And I think it's a little helpful to think about a rule of life as like a trellis. The Spirit makes the plant grow, and the goal of the plant is to bear fruit, like fruit of the Spirit. And it will happen, but it's a lot easier, and it's a lot, it'll shape you a lot more if you have something stable to hold you up while you grow. Hopefully that made sense. That was a little clunky, but okay. And today I want to talk about one daily rhythm that I would highly recommend adding to your rhythm of life, and that is praying the Psalms. You can go to the next one. So first, I just want to look at this ancient practice of praying the Psalms, what it means. Then I want to look again at how Daniel did this. And then I want to clear up some misconceptions about the Psalms. But first, what are the Psalms? Psalms, if you open your Bible, if you have one, or just pull up an app, it's probably like right around the middle of your Bible. There's the book of Psalms. It's like 150 Psalms right there. A lot of them are written by David, but there's also a bunch of other authors. A lot of them are anonymous. They're all collected there. And the Jewish people, in the ancient Israelite people, made a habit to practice and pray the Psalms 3 times a day, along with the Shema prayer. If you don't know the Shema prayer, it's, "Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is your God, Yahweh alone, love the Lord your God, with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all your strength." And then they would read some Psalms. So most Jews had the Psalms memorized, and they would pray them regularly. And they were special because there were so many different kinds of Psalms from so many different places. And they're very honest. Some are orienting Psalms. And by that, I mean like most of the songs we do on Sunday morning. Not all, but most. That are like, "God, you're awesome, and you make my life better. And I just want to thank you for that. We love you. We thank you for your faithfulness." But then there are some uncomfortable, disorienting Psalms. They get very raw and very real, and it can be even uncomfortable reading them sometimes because we aren't always that used to being that honest to God, telling him how absent he feels and how angry you are. I think having these Psalms in the Bible reveal that God really appreciates honesty over perfection when it comes to prayer. I know some people who, in their hardest times of life, like mourning or something just terrible happening, they don't want to talk to God, and they can't find the words to talk to God. And a lot of times, the only thing they could pray is falling back on the Psalms because it gave them the words that they could use to talk to God. Because some of those Psalms, they don't even end well. They're like, "God, I feel like you're not here. I feel like you don't hear me. I feel like you don't love me. I don't see your faithfulness around me. People have hurt me, and I want to hurt them. And where are you? Amen." And then it ends. I mean, are we used to praying like that? Not very often, I think. But the Psalms are there to guide us to pray that way when we feel that way. But then there are also reorienting Psalms for when you're in a different phase of life. When you were like, I was in the hard times, and you helped me get through them. And it felt hopeless, and you drew me out, and you reoriented me. And I'm thankful now, but in a much deeper way. So they have all 3 of those kinds of Psalms are just full in the book of Psalms. And again, Jews would pray them 3 times a day. Jesus would have prayed them all the time, growing up as a Jewish man. And we'll look at that later. But it seems very often, even when Jesus improvised his prayers, he used words that came from the Psalms. It's like his prayers were so influenced by the Psalms that when he was trying to come up with something off the top of his head, the Psalms just came out. So real quick, we're going to step back, look at Daniel, recap some of the stuff Philip said. I think we were kind of in sync, even though we didn't talk about it ahead of time. It was cool. But Daniel is a Jew in exile. He was taken from his home by Babylon, a kingdom that they just, in the Bible, it's considered like pure evil. Nebuchadnezzar comes. It's a destructive empire taking over the world, burns down Jerusalem, destroys the temple. And then Persia comes, even worse, destroys Babylon, and is the next evil kingdom over the Jews. And the Jews at this point have no place to meet with God. I think we often underestimate how highly the Jews thought of the temple. They're like, this is the place, the meeting space we have with God. They didn't think of God as like always with us, we could just talk to in every place, everywhere. They were like, no, God lives in the temple. If we're going to go talk to him, we're going to go to the temple. And just imagine the temple being destroyed. And now they feel cut off from God. But as some Psalm scholars like Chris Quinn put it, the temple was the place Jews could meet and commune with God. Without the temple to meet with God, the Jews saw the Psalms like little portable temples for your spirit, the only way of limited communication with God and being with him even in exile. So you can see how much the Jews living in exile would want and look forward to praying the Psalms as much as possible as foreign slaves in a foreign land. And Daniel was in a very unique position in Persia. He actually earned the King Darius' favor by being a really good political leader. He became an administrator in the Persian government. And I'm sure they had mixed reactions with his Jewish friends, but he decided to take the job for the government, which might be challenging to us sometimes. He took a job in the government that was the enemy to his people and one of the most corrupt governments at that time. But Daniel felt like God was calling him to that position, so he takes it, and seeks to make a difference to help out his people in that position. But then Darius's administrators, who don't like Daniel, seem to know that Daniel is a very good Jew and will pray the Shema and likely the Psalms 3 times a day. So they go and tell Darius to pass an ordinance that for 1 month, no one can pray to anybody but him. And Darius thinks that sounds like a really good deal. Why would I not want to do that? More prayers for me. But think about this just for a second. Daniel is a good Persian citizen. He seeks the good of his country even though he knows it's corrupt. God has given favor for him from the king. And the only things he's gotten in trouble for so far are things that the Torah, his commands that he's gotten from God, have told him not to do. Like the Torah says, do not worship idols, do not eat non-kosher. And when he's been pressured to do those things, he didn't do them. And those have gotten him in trouble. But everything else, he's adopted from Babylon or from Persia. He's okay with. He's willing to compromise and work on some things. He's willing to take on a Babylonian name. He's willing to dress the way Persians dress and even work in the government. But there are some lines he won't cross. But in the Torah, it never says that you have to pray 3 times a day. It never says that you have to pray at all. It never says you can't take 1 month off of prayer. And all he would have to do is just take a month off of prayer. He wouldn't be breaking the Torah, and he could just go back to praying the next month. So why does he decide to pray anyway? Why did he pray the Psalms 3 times a day? Why did he think that was so important that he was willing to put his life on the line for it and risk his job and risk everything he's worked towards to do that? And you probably know the story leads to him being thrown in the lion's den. God takes care of him. Things work out. And we can't know for sure. But John Mark Comer, again, suspects that another part of prayer is that prayer is formative, especially when you're praying the scripture itself. It shapes who you are and it grounds you in God's presence. And to exist on that level of leadership in one of the most corrupt nations, one that is constantly redefining good and evil for its own benefit, and he has power in that nation, how easy would it be for him to become corrupt? And how much would he need to ground himself? And Comer suspects one reason he prays 3 times a day is because he thinks the only way I'm going to stay grounded, the only way I'm going to stay connected to God in this environment, the only way I'm going to keep being formed into the image of Yahweh and not the image of Persia or Babylon is if I keep reading these Psalms 3 times a day. Enough that he was willing to risk his life to do that. He thought consistent psalm prayer was so formative and so worth it, it was worth dying. And I think often we probably don't get that, But that probably means that there's something we need to rethink rather than there's something he needs to rethink about the value of reading the Psalms. There are also a few misconceptions about the Psalms I want to clarify real quick. One of the critiques comes from the more Pentecostal, charismatic side of the church sometimes, not always, but sometimes, and I've heard it before, and it's that pre-scripted or pre-written prayers are dead or not authentic or not from the heart because you don't really mean it. You're just reading something someone else wrote, so it doesn't really count, or it's not really like meaningful. Dead religion or something like that. And I used to think that growing up, and now I think that's just wrong. And one reason is Jesus, because Jesus, in the most intense and emotional moment of his life, the passion, the crucifixion, when he's dying on the cross, he only says a few things the whole time, that whole trial, the whole death on the cross. And some of them are, Father, why have you abandoned me? It is finished, and into your hands I commit my spirit. And all of those lines come from the Psalms. They're all direct quotes from the Psalms. So in his most emotional moment, when Jesus is feeling the most desperate, he decides to pray the Psalms. It's like he prayed them so much, they are what naturally pours out of him when he wants to pray from the heart. And unless you want to say that Jesus' prayers on the cross or dead religion, I would not say that reading the Psalms or pre-written prayers are dead religion. I actually often think that the Psalms are much deeper and more personal than our own prayers, often, unless we have a very poetic mindset, because they give us words that we have a hard time finding in the moment. And I definitely recommend, if you find praying hard already, like you don't really know what to pray for, to start with the Psalms. The other thing that changed my mind is that these prayers are in the Scripture and inspired by the Spirit. Often I'll pray the same things over and over and over again and stick to what's familiar, but they really expand the way that I pray. And I have found that the more that I pray the Psalms regularly, the deeper my own spontaneous prayers become, because I know how to pray deeply from the Psalms themselves. So it doesn't replace spontaneous prayer or free prayer or whatever, but I think it actually improves it and complements it really well. It's the same way, Isaac just left, so I can pick on Isaac. Isaac knows the guitar really well, but if you were to ask Isaac, come play from the heart and just make something up, if he hadn't already known how to play some great songs really, really, really well, he wouldn't be able to improv very well. He would probably just be strumming some crazy stuff. The better he knows how to play like the classics, the better he knows how music works, the better he'll flow, and the better he can improv. And I think that reading the Psalms, knowing how to pray deeply, knowing how to connect with God really deeply and be really honest, isn't a replacement for personal improv prayer or intercession, but it's something that pushes it deeper and gives us words that we might not have found otherwise. Finally, I think that reading the Psalms is something that can be done easily together, because we can pray the same thing at the same time, like a song. And it can be done really regularly as a rhythm of life, because most of the Psalms aren't that long. About 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, we learned a lot about praying the Psalms from a sister church in Yahoo in Switzerland. And Oliver and Walter Dewar, the pastors there, came and taught us about praying the Psalms. And we got a church psalm prayer called the Agpeya. The art was done by some members of their church. It's beautiful art. And all it is the Psalms organized by hours, so that you can pray them in the hours. It's adopted from a monastery. In that monastery, they pray all of the Psalms every single day. We, as Protestants, know that probably doesn't fit into our schedule. But that's okay. I mean, it's just, we have a different life. And so they're reorganized here into a way that a normal human being could pray them and not feel overwhelmed. There's an older version of the book, came out 5 years ago. Liz Danford and Barb Landis used to lead some prayers once a week in the chapel and then over Zoom during COVID. But after Liz moved away, it became less frequent. But at that time, a lot of the church became used to reading these Psalms together and reading these prayers together. And I think it's great. It has some great explanations in the beginning about how to read the Psalms, why to read the Psalms, and some other ancient prayers in the back. And it's personalized to our church, which is cool. So I recommend, if you don't have one of these, getting one of these. It's $25, and I want to make this really clear. The church makes no money from this at all. It's exactly the price it costs to make it, and you just want to pay the artists. But I think it's a good way to pray together. But it's not about that. Even if you don't go here regularly and you don't want to get one of these, I still highly recommend praying the Psalms. They're all free on your phone, very easily accessible. Something the doers made clear when they were teaching about the Akpeia, this is what this book is called, and the Psalms when they were here, is not to turn it into a program or hype it up or something like that, which maybe I'm doing right now, but just to try it and let it speak for itself. This isn't like a church challenge or event or something. It's also not something I think we can fully explain or convince you of just by describing it. But I think it's a tool to add to your daily rhythm of life, a rhythm that Daniel thought was so valuable he was willing to die over, and a rhythm so formative to Jesus that when he suffered the most, these are the words that came out of him. And I don't know about you, but I want to learn to pray that way, the way Jesus prayed, the way Daniel prayed, the way the early Jews and Christians prayed. Praying the same words that Jesus prayed. So whether you already have a book or want one or don't, or will look up Psalms on your phone, whatever, I just encourage you to take the Psalms seriously. I believe they can be deeply formative and very effective in formation and counter-formation. And I would recommend really starting small. You know, we don't need to read every Psalm every day. I know I can't do that. I think consistency is way more important than length. If you read one Psalm once a week, I think that's something that can be very transformative. So some of these are out there if you want to take a look at them. You can reach out to an elder or something if you want one or if you already have one. But I would just really encourage you to adopt this into your rhythm of life. Again, my dad will cover some other things that we can adopt into our rhythm of life to hopefully form us communally into more and more, form us and counterform us into the image of Christ, into the Sermon on the Mount person that just acts lovingly on default. Some other books I recommend besides the Akpeia, this book, I just recommend the Psalms, but I also recommend Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German theologian. He's really cool, and he has a book called Psalms, the Prayer Book of the Bible, where he talks about the transformative power in his life of praying the Psalms over and over again, if you want some inspiration. So if you have any questions about Psalms, about this book, about just any of this, I really encourage you to not hold those questions in, but just start a conversation with a friend or with an elder or with me or with whoever. And just to let it process and give it a shot, even if you find them boring at first.